Dr. Keckstall adjusted his protective goggles for the 47th time that morning and triple-checked the atmospheric filters in Greenhouse Bay 7. His 4 spindly arms moved with neurotic precision, each clutching a different scanning device that beeped ominously at the slightest detection of pollen particles. The tall, gray-skinned Vexnari had spent the last 3 years turning this remote research station into what he proudly called the galaxy's most comprehensive catalog of flora that will absolutely murder you. Which is exactly why he was having what humans might call a panic attack when he heard the transport shuttle landing outside. No, Keckstall muttered, his large black eyes darting between his carefully organized death garden and the approaching footsteps. Today was supposed to be a quiet day of documenting the screaming thornvine's new method of psychological warfare, not babysitting some primitive mammal who probably thinks safety protocol is a type of breakfast cereal. The airlock hissed open, and in walked the most aggressively human specimen QXTEL had ever encountered. Jake Morrison stood about 6 feet tall, which was roughly the same height as QXTEL but distributed in a way that suggested he bench-pressed starships for fun. His brown hair looked like he'd styled it with a plasma grenade, and he wore the standard-issue research station jumpsuit like it was a costume from a low-budget space opera. "Hey there, Doc," Jake said, flashing a grin that displayed an alarming number of teeth. "I'm your new intern. Hope you don't mind working with someone who's not afraid to get his hands dirty." QXTEL's translator implant nearly short-circuited trying to process the casual disrespect embedded in that sentence. Not afraid to get his hands dirty was precisely what QXTEL was afraid of. In his greenhouse, dirty hands were dead hands, usually within minutes. "Ah yes, the human," Keckstall said, backing away as Jake approached one of the specimen cases. "Before you touch anything, die horribly, and ruin my research data, perhaps we should review the safety protocols. All 467 pages of them." Jake laughed. Actually laughed at safety protocols. "Come on, Doc, how dangerous could a few plants be? Back on Earth I used to eat wild berries straight off the bush during hiking trips. Never killed me once." Keckstall felt his secondary heart skip a beat. "Never killed you once? Once?" The fact that you phrase it that way suggests multiple near-death experiences, which only reinforces my point that your species has a concerning relationship with self-preservation. "Relax, I'm sure it'll be fine," Jake said, already wandering toward the climate-controlled section where Keckstall kept his most prized specimens. "What's the worst that could happen?" Dr. Keckstall made a sound that his species used to indicate impending doom, which his translator rendered as a long, mechanical sigh. He'd spent years studying plants that could dissolve bone marrow, cause spontaneous combustion, or trap victims in hallucinogenic nightmares for eternity. But somehow, watching this grinning human approach his life's work, Keckstall realized he'd finally encountered the most dangerous organism on the station. And it wasn't even a plant. The next morning, Keckstall had barely finished his ritualistic equipment sterilization when Jake bounced into the greenhouse like he was entering a recreational park rather than a botanical chamber of horrors. Keckstall watched in fascination as the human completely ignored the warning signs written in 17 different galactic languages, including the one that featured a skull and crossbones so universal that even primitive civilizations understood it meant, "This will end you." "So, Doc," Jake said, rubbing his hands together with disturbing enthusiasm, "what's on today's agenda? Please tell me it involves something more exciting than yesterday's lecture about why I shouldn't breathe near the asphyxiation orchids." QXTEL clutched his datapad like a security blanket. "Well, actually, I was planning to unveil my latest acquisition. It arrived yesterday from the Forbidden Sector, but given your species' apparent inability to process danger warnings, perhaps we should start with something less immediately fatal. Like the mild discomfort daisies?" "Nah, let's see the good stuff," Jake said, already heading toward the maximum security containment unit at the far end of the greenhouse. "That big sealed box over there looks promising. What's in it?" Keckstall's forearms began flailing in what observers might charitably call interpretive dance, but was actually a complex gesture of existential dread. "That is the Crimson Reaper, also known as Death Fruit, which I acquired at considerable risk to document its lethality. It's beautiful, aromatic, and according to every credible xenobiological database, capable of killing any sentient being within 3 minutes of consumption." Jake pressed his face against the containment glass like a child at a candy store. Inside, suspended in a field of protective energy, hung what looked like the galaxy's most appetizing piece of fruit. It was roughly the size of a large apple, deep crimson with golden swirls, and it seemed to glow with an inner light that suggested either divine blessing or catastrophic toxicity. "Wow," Jake said, and Quetzal felt a chill run down his elongated spine because he recognized that tone. It was the same tone humans used when they saw something they definitely shouldn't touch, but absolutely were going to touch anyway. It looks delicious. Delicious? Quextal's voice cracked across 3 octaves. It's called death fruit. Death fruit. The name is specifically designed to communicate lethality to species smart enough to understand basic vocabulary. Before Jake could respond with what Quextal was certain would be another terrifyingly casual dismissal of mortal peril, the greenhouse's main entrance hissed open. Commander Vexista strode in, her purple skin gleaming under the artificial sunlight, and her expression suggesting she'd rather be anywhere else in the galaxy. Dr. Quextal, she said in the tone of someone who'd spent too many years managing scientists who couldn't be trusted with safety scissors. The monthly safety inspection is due, and I need to verify that your new human intern hasn't accidentally poisoned himself yet. Yet, being the operative word, Quextal muttered. Jake turned from the death fruit display with that same unsettling grin. Commander, perfect timing. The doc here was just showing me this amazing fruit that supposedly kills people in 3 minutes. I was wondering if anyone's actually tested that claim, or if it's just theoretical. Commander Vexa looked between Jake's eager face and Quextal's horrified expression, then slowly reached for the sedative injector on her belt. Dr. Quextal, please tell me you've explained to the human why we don't test lethal specimens on living subjects. I've tried, Quextal said weakly, but I'm beginning to suspect that explaining danger to humans is like explaining water to a fish. They acknowledge it exists, but fail to grasp why it should concern them. The incident occurred exactly 47 minutes later, which Quextal knew precisely because he'd been obsessively checking his chronometer while trying to focus on recalibrating the venomous violet's containment field. He'd left Jake alone for exactly 3 minutes and 12 seconds to retrieve a specialized scanner from the storage bay. 3 minutes and 12 seconds. That was apparently all the time a human needed to make the kind of decision that would haunt Quextal's nightmares for the rest of his considerably long lifespan. When he returned, Jake was standing next to the death fruit containment unit, which was now conspicuously open. More alarming still, Jake was chewing. Oh no, Quextal whispered, dropping his scanner with a clatter that echoed through the greenhouse like a death knell. Oh no, oh no, oh no. Jake looked up with bulging cheeks, like some kind of terrifying mammalian storage creature. He held up one finger in the universal gesture for, wait a moment, while I finish potentially dying, swallowed with obvious satisfaction, then smiled, that horrible human smile. Hey, Doc. You're back, Jake said casually, as if he hadn't just consumed what was arguably the most lethal piece of fruit in the known galaxy. So, funny story. I was examining the containment field, just trying to understand the technology, and I accidentally triggered the release mechanism, and then, well, the fruit just kind of rolled out, and it smelled really good, and I figured someone should test it eventually, right? Torture. Quetzal's datapad slipped from his nerveless fingers. His 4 arms began shaking in sequence, starting with his upper left, and progressing clockwise in what his species called the tremor of impending professional catastrophe. You ate it, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. You actually ate the death fruit. Just a bite, Jake said, then paused thoughtfully. Okay, maybe more like a third of it. It's got this interesting flavor profile. Kind of sweet at first, then there's this tingling sensation, and the aftertaste is like spicy mango mixed with something I can't quite identify. Maybe cinnamon? Quextal fumbled for his emergency chronometer. 3 minutes, he said, his voice rising to what could generously be called a controlled panic. According to every database in the galactic network, you have 3 minutes before systemic organ failure, followed by rapid cellular breakdown, followed by what the medical texts describe as spectacular and irreversible death. Jake shrugged. I feel fine. Actually, I feel pretty good. That tingling I mentioned is kind of pleasant, like when you drink something carbonated, but all over. 2 minutes and 47 seconds, Quextal announced, beginning to pace in tight circles. This is unprecedented. I need to document everything. What are your symptoms? Nausea? Dizziness? Existential dread? The sudden urge to write a final message to loved ones? Mostly just wondering if you have any more of these, Jake said, holding up the partially eaten death fruit. Because honestly, this is the best thing I've tasted since I left Earth. Way better than the processed nutrition cubes they serve in the cafeteria. Quextal stopped pacing and stared at him. You want more? You want seconds of the death fruit? Well, yeah, Jake said, taking another bite with the kind of casual enjoyment typically reserved for non-lethal snacks. Unless you're saving it for something special. 2 minutes and 18 seconds, Ixchal said weakly, then louder. 2 minutes and 18 seconds until you die horribly. And you're asking for more? Jake considered this while chewing thoughtfully. Look, Doc, I appreciate the concern, but I'm starting to think your database might be a little off on this one. How many minute and 53 seconds, Ixchal announced, his voice cracking like a teenager asking someone to prom. He'd pulled up every xenobotanical database he had access to, cross-referencing them with mortality statistics, toxicology reports, and what appeared to be several insurance claim forms filed by the families of previous deathfruit victims. The databases can't be wrong. They're compiled from observations across 47 different star systems, and validated by the Galactic Institute of Things That Will Kill You Quickly. Jake finished the last bite of deathfruit and made an appreciative sound that roughly translated to yum in any language. 1 minute and 53 seconds until what exactly? Because I've got to tell you, the only thing I'm feeling is a slight energy boost. It's like I had a really good cup of coffee, if coffee tasted like tropical paradise and didn't make me jittery. Hextall's research had never prepared him for this scenario. In all his years of cataloging lethal flora, he'd operated under the assumption that things labeled deadly were, in fact, deadly. It was a foundational principle of xenobotany, like gravity, or the fact that graduate students would always eat the laboratory supplies if you didn't watch them carefully. This is impossible, he muttered, frantically scrolling through data files. The Crimson Reaper has a documented mortality rate of 100% among tested species. 100%, Jake. That's not a suggestion, that's mathematics. What species were tested? Jake asked, and Hextall paused his panic scrolling to consider the question. Well, let's see. The Zephyrine Council tested it on volunteer prisoners, fatal within 2 minutes. The Helix Consortium used condemned criminals, dead in 3 minutes and 12 seconds. The Academic Research Station Beta 7 conducted experiments on various mammals from different worlds. Hextall's voice trailed off as he read further. All subjects experienced rapid organ failure and death within the documented time frame. The greenhouse's emergency alert system chose that moment to activate, flooding the space with flashing red lights and a recorded voice announcing, "Medical emergency detected, requesting immediate assistance from qualified personnel who hopefully know what they're doing." Commander Vexa burst through the entrance like she'd been shot from a cannon, her medical scanner already active and sweeping the area for biological hazards. "What's the situation? My sensors detected massive toxin exposure in this sector, and given that you're supervising the human, I assumed someone was either dead or about to be." The human consumed approximately 1/3 of a Crimson Reaper specimen 47 seconds ago, Hextall reported with the mechanical precision of someone whose worldview was systematically crumbling. He should be entering the final stages of cellular breakdown right about now. Commander Vexai's scanner immediately locked onto Jake, who waved cheerfully at her. She stared at the readout, then shook the device, then stared at it again. "According to my bioscanner, he's not dying," she said slowly. "In fact, his vital signs indicate he's in excellent health, possibly better health than when he arrived this morning." "That's what I've been trying to tell the doc," Jake said. "I think his data might be a little inaccurate, either that or humans are just built different." Hextall looked between his database, Jake's annoyingly healthy appearance, and Commander Vex's scanner readouts. Somewhere in his mind, he could hear the sound of his scientific reputation quietly packing its bags and preparing to leave forever. "Built different," he repeated numbly. 3 years of research into the galaxy's most lethal botanical specimens, and they're defeated by humans being built different? Jake shrugged. "Hey, on the bright side, at least now you know the fruit isn't universally deadly. That's new data, right? Isn't that what science is all about?" Hextall stood frozen in the middle of his greenhouse, surrounded by plants that had defined his entire career, while his brain performed what could only be described as the intellectual equivalent of a complete systems reboot. His 4 hands moved independently, one pulling up research files, another adjusting his protective equipment, a third nervously grooming his antenna, and the fourth making small circles in the air, as if trying to physically grasp the concept that everything he knew might be wrong. "New data," he repeated slowly, like someone learning a foreign language. "Yes, new data." Then, with increasing panic, "New data that completely invalidates 3 years of research, 17 published papers, and my upcoming presentation to the Galactic Botanical Safety Commission, titled, 'Why the Crimson Reaper Will Definitely Kill You and Everyone You Love.'" Commander Vexa was still running her scanner over Jake, who had begun examining the empty death fruit containment unit with the casual interest of someone browsing a farmer's market. "Dr. Kookstall," she said, her voice carrying the particular tone commanders used when they suspected they were about to uncover something embarrassing, "perhaps we should review your research methodology. Specifically, how did you determine that this fruit was universally lethal?" Kextel's secondary heart began beating in double time as he pulled up his files. "Well, the initial data came from the Zephyrian Council's prison experiments. 12 subjects, all deceased within 3 minutes of consumption. Then the Helix Consortium's criminal testing program, another 15 subjects, all fatal outcomes. Academic Research Station Beta 7 tested it on 23 different mammalian species from various worlds, and every single test resulted in death." He paused, his large black eyes scanning the data with the growing horror of someone who was beginning to see the forest for the trees. "Then, there were the 47 reported cases from the Forbidden Sector mining colonies, all fatal. The 17 incidents from trading posts along the Outer Rim, all lethal. The 8 cases from exploratory vessels, all resulting in crew casualties." "Doc," Jake said, looking up from his examination of the containment unit, "I don't want to tell you how to do your job, but did any of these studies include humans?" "Well, no," Kextel said defensively. "Humans are relatively new to galactic civilization, and most research institutions consider you too unpredictable to include in systematic studies. There's actually a standing joke in xenobiology circles that humans will either die from something completely harmless or survive something that should be impossible, and there's no way to predict which." Commander Vex's expression shifted from confusion to what Jake was learning to recognize as the specific type of frustration reserved for dealing with scientists who'd overlooked something obvious. "Dr. Kextel, please tell me you at least cross-reference the biological compatibility data between the test species and the fruit's toxin." Skelda's third hand stopped grooming his antenna. His second hand paused its nervous air circling. Even his primary research hand stopped scrolling through files. The only movement came from his fourth hand, which began trembling in what his species called the shake of impending academic humiliation. "Cross-reference the biological compatibility data," he said weakly. "Yes," Commander Vexa said with the patience of someone explaining basic mathematics to a child. "Different species have different biological vulnerabilities. What's lethal to a Zephyrian might be harmless to a human. What kills a Helix Consortium member might be nutritious to someone else. Did you check whether these deaths were caused by universal toxicity or species-specific allergic reactions?" The silence that followed was broken only by the gentle humming of the greenhouse's environmental systems and the sound of Jake helping himself to another piece of fruit from Kextal's mildly dangerous collection. "Oh no," Kextal whispered, his translator struggling with the complex emotional subtext of profound scientific embarrassment. "Oh no. Oh no." "What's oh no?" Jake asked, pausing mid-bite of what appeared to be a purple fruit that sparkled with its own internal light. Kextal's datapad slipped from his nerveless fingers for the second time that day. "I never checked for biological compatibility. I just assumed that something called death fruit that killed every test subject was universally lethal. I never considered that maybe, just maybe, it was only deadly to the species that were actually tested." Commander Vex's scanner beeped cheerfully as it analyzed Jake's latest snack. "According to my readings, whatever he just ate is providing him with an excellent source of vitamins, minerals, and what appears to be a mild stimulant effect, similar to caffeine." "That was a midnight sparkler," Kextel said faintly. "It's supposed to cause hallucinogenic episodes followed by temporary paralysis." Jake considered this while chewing. "It tastes like blueberries with a hint of mint. Really refreshing, actually." He paused thoughtfully. "You know, Doc, I'm starting to think you might want to consider the possibility that your entire research database is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of interspecies biology." Bextel made a sound that his translator rendered as a mechanical sob. 3 years, he said. 3 years of cataloging deadly plants that might actually be the galaxy's most exotic fruit salad. My reputation is ruined. The Botanical Safety Commission will revoke my credentials. I'll be lucky to get a job teaching basic plant identification to first-year students on a mining colony in the Outer Rim. Or, Jake said, finishing the midnight sparkler and reaching for something that looked like a golden pear with silver stripes, you could become the galaxy's leading expert on human-compatible xenobotany. Think about it. You've got the largest collection of supposedly deadly plants in this sector, and now you've got a test subject who's apparently immune to most of them. That's not a career ender, that's a career changer. Commander Vexa looked between Jake's optimistic grin and QXTL's expression of existential despair. The human makes a valid point. Instead of studying what kills people, you could study what doesn't kill humans. Specifically, given their recent integration into galactic society, that information could be quite valuable. Textol stared at Jake, who had now moved on to what appeared to be a cluster of bright orange berries that were supposed to cause spontaneous combustion in most carbon-based life forms. Jake popped one in his mouth, chewed thoughtfully, and declared, "These taste like spicy oranges. Really nice heat level. Not overwhelming." "Spicy oranges," Caxtel repeated numbly. "The flame berries of Cassix Prime taste like spicy oranges." "Yeah," Jake said, offering the cluster to Commander Vexa, who declined with the kind of quick headshake usually reserved for declining offers of live explosives. "Want to try one?" 3 hours later, QXTL sat in his office staring at a datapad displaying what could only be described as the most thorough dietary analysis in galactic history. Jake had systematically worked his way through approximately 60% of the greenhouse's lethal collection, providing detailed tasting notes that ranged from "needs salt" to "surprisingly nutty" to "would go great with cheese if I had any cheese." Commander Vexa stood behind Kextel's desk, reading over his shoulder and occasionally making sounds that suggested she was fighting a losing battle against inappropriate laughter. On the other side of the office, Jake was sprawled in a chair, looking remarkably healthy for someone who had consumed enough supposedly deadly flora to kill a small army. "So let me get this straight," Commander Vexa said, scrolling through Jake's impromptu food reviews. "The weeping death moss tastes like earthy lettuce with a nice crunch. The bone-dissolving lichen has a pleasant sour taste, like sourdough bread. And the screaming thorn vines produce berries that are basically nature's candy, but with more fiber. Don't forget the void blossoms," Jake added helpfully. "Those were amazing, like eating flower petals that taste like vanilla ice cream. I'm definitely going to want more of those." Caxtel looked up from his datapad with the expression of someone whose entire worldview had been fed through a matter-antimatter reactor and reassembled by committee. According to the galactic databases, the void blossoms are supposed to cause immediate sensory deprivation, followed by a complete loss of connection to reality. "Mamie did make me feel really relaxed," Jake admitted. "Kinda like that feeling you get after a good meal and a warm bath. Is that what they mean by loss of connection to reality? Because if so, your database might have a slight bias toward the dramatic." Commander Vexa cleared her throat in the way that Mommanders did when they were about to make an executive decision that would probably give someone a headache. "Dr. Kextal, I'm officially reassigning your research focus. Instead of cataloging plants that kill people, you're now tasked with identifying alien flora that's safe for human consumption. Consider it a lateral career move from bringer of botanical doom to curator of the galaxy's most exclusive salad bar." "But my reputation," Kextal protested weakly. 3 years of research into deadly specimens. 17 published papers on lethal xenobotany. My presentation to the Botanical Safety Commission is scheduled for next month. "Simple," Jake said, popping what appeared to be a small purple fruit into his mouth. "Change your presentation title to Why Human Contact Xenobotany Will Revolutionize Galactic Agriculture. Instead of talking about things that kill people, talk about the untapped nutritional potential of previously unexplored plant species. You'll go from being the guy who studies scary plants to the guy who discovered an entirely new food source." Commander Vexa nodded approvingly. "The human makes excellent points. The Galactic Council has been struggling with food distribution problems in the outer colonies. A catalog of nutritious, human-compatible plants could solve supply issues across multiple sectors. You'd go from academic curiosity to practical here." Kextel considered this while watching Jake examine a small, crystalline fruit that was supposed to cause temporal displacement in most species. "You're suggesting I rebrand my entire career around the fact that humans can apparently eat anything that doesn't eat them first?" "Not anything," Jake corrected, taking a cautious bite of the crystalline fruit. "I tried that blue fungus over there earlier and it tasted terrible, like licking a battery. Definitely wouldn't recommend it for large-scale consumption." He paused, considering the temporal displacement fruit. "This one's interesting, though. Kind of tastes like it's carbonated, but the bubbles are happening in slow motion." "The chronosphere fruit is supposed to unstick you from the normal flow of time," Quextel said, his voice carrying the resigned tone of someone who no longer questioned the impossible. "Yeah, I can kind of feel that," Jake said thoughtfully. "It's like everything else is moving just slightly faster than I am. Pretty trippy, but not unpleasant. Definitely wouldn't want to eat a whole bunch of these before operating heavy machinery, but as an occasional snack, it's got potential." Commander Vexa pulled up a requisition form on her datapad. "Dr. Kuxtel, I'm officially promoting Jake to Senior Research Associate, specializing in human dietary compatibility assessment. His job will be to systematically test your plant collection and provide detailed reports on nutritional value, safety, and taste profiles. You're making him my boss, Calextil said flatly. I'm making him your partner, Commander Vexa corrected. You provide the scientific expertise and botanical knowledge. He provides the biological compatibility testing and practical assessment. Together, you could revolutionize how we think about interspecies nutrition. Jake grinned and reached for another specimen, this one resembling a bright yellow fruit covered in what looked like tiny lightning bolts. Don't worry, Doc. I promise to be a very thorough researcher. I'll test everything at least twice, just to make sure my results are consistent. Twice, Kextal repeated, watching Jake bite into what was supposed to be the most electrically charged fruit in known space. You want to eat everything twice. Quality control, Jake explained, chewing happily while small sparks of electricity danced around his teeth. This one's like eating Pop Rocks that actually pop. Really fun texture and it gives you this nice tingly feeling. I bet this would be great in desserts. Quextal looked at his carefully organized greenhouse, full of specimens he'd spent years learning to fear, now being systematically converted into Jake's personal snack collection. He thought about his upcoming presentation to the Botanical Safety Commission, his 17 published papers on lethal xenobotany, and his reputation as the galaxy's leading expert on plants that would kill you quickly and efficiently. Then he looked at Jake, who was now examining a fruit that was supposed to phase-shift victims into an alternate dimension, and who was probably going to ask for hot sauce to go with it. Fine, Quextal said, reaching for a fresh datapad. But I'm adding a new safety protocol. From now on, all taste testing will be conducted in the presence of a qualified medical officer, and we're keeping a detailed log of everything you consume, including preparation methods, serving sizes, and any requests for condiments. Deal, Jake said cheerfully. Speaking of which, do you think the cafeteria has any hot sauce? Because I've got a feeling that some of these fruits would be amazing with a little extra kick. Commander Vexa made a note on her datapad. I'll have a case of hot sauce delivered to the greenhouse, various heat levels, from mildly spicy to capable of stripping paint. Consider it a research expense. Castell watched Jake's face light up with the kind of enthusiasm that most species reserved for discovering new forms of mathematics or achieving faster-than-light travel. Hot sauce, he muttered, beginning to type notes into his datapad. I'm going to need a whole new set of safety protocols for hot sauce. But as he watched Jake happily planning his next round of research, Kexto realized that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of his career after all. Maybe it was the beginning of something entirely new, something that involved a lot less death and a lot more hot sauce. And if he was being completely honest, that didn't sound like such a terrible thing.